This officer thought he was in control. The flashing lights behind him painted the entire intersection red and blue, bouncing off the glass towers rising above the street. Traffic had slowed. A few cars had already stopped completely. People were beginning to watch, and in the center of it all stood one woman in a red jacket. The officer grabbed the front of her collar with one hand and shouted loud enough for half the block to hear. "What part of Move Back did you not understand?" She didn't pull away. She didn't shout back. She didn't even raise her voice. Her sunglasses reflected the police lights flickering across the hood of the patrol car behind them. The officer mistook that calm for defiance. And that was his first mistake. Because what he didn't realize, what absolutely no one on that street realized yet, was that grabbing her jacket had just triggered a chain of events that would travel far beyond this intersection, far beyond his badge, far beyond this city. It's funny to think about where people are listening from right now. Maybe it's late at night where you are. Maybe the sun is just coming up. Every now and then, I look through the comments and see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy stories like this one, make sure this channel doesn't disappear from your feed, because the next story might be the one you don't want to miss. We are not creating a single story. We are building a recurring narrative universe, and this particular story started with one officer making a decision he couldn't undo. The officer's name was Daniel Mercer. 8 years on the force, 3 commendations, 2 excessive conduct complaints that had quietly disappeared during internal review. Tonight, he had been assigned to crowd control. A routine call at first, small disturbance, vehicle collision, nothing unusual. But Mercer had already been irritated long before the woman in the red jacket stepped out of her car. Dispatch had been noisy, traffic had been heavy, and the last thing he wanted was someone standing near an active police scene asking questions. "Step back!" Mercer barked again. His hand tightened on the fabric of her jacket. Around them, the city hummed with the low tension of an unfolding situation. Sirens echoed in the distance. 2 more patrol vehicles had just arrived and parked diagonally across the lane. A small group of pedestrians had gathered on the sidewalk. Phones were already beginning to rise into the air. The woman finally spoke. Her voice was calm, almost quiet. "You're making a mistake." Mercer laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was the confident kind. The kind that comes from believing authority is firmly on your side. "I hear that one every week," he said. "You can explain it to the judge." She tilted her head slightly, still calm, still composed, but there was something else in the way she watched him, something observant, something patient. And that was the detail Mercer completely missed, because the woman in the red jacket wasn't reacting the way people usually did. Most people argued. Most people raised their voices. Most people tried to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she asked a simple question. "Officer Mercer, correct?" That stopped him for half a second. His name badge was visible, but the way she said it felt different. Not confrontational, not impressed, just noted. "Yes," Mercer snapped. "And you're about 10 seconds away from being detained if you don't move." Another patrol car door slammed nearby. 2 more officers stepped out. The flashing lights intensified. The crowd grew larger. Phones now pointed openly toward the confrontation. But Mercer didn't notice the cameras. He was focused on asserting control. "You think those sunglasses make you invisible?" he said, leaning closer. "Take them off." The woman didn't move. Mercer's voice rose again. "I said take them off." A few people in the crowd exchanged looks. The tension was starting to feel uncomfortable. Something about the scene felt wrong. But Mercer doubled down. "Last warning," he said. That's when the woman slowly reached up. She removed the sunglasses and looked directly at him. Her expression didn't change, but Mercer felt something shift. Not fear, not anger, just steady observation. Like someone taking note of every detail. "You're escalating this unnecessarily," she said. "Am I?" Mercer shot back. "Yes." Her tone remained measured. You grabbed a civilian without cause, Mercer scoffed. You're obstructing an investigation. Am I? She repeated calmly. He stepped closer, now clearly irritated. You want to test that in custody? A murmur passed through the growing crowd. One of the officers behind Mercer shifted slightly. Something about the exchange felt increasingly strange. The woman looked briefly past Mercer toward the patrol cars, then back to him. You're sure you want to continue? Mercer laughed again. You think I'm scared of paperwork? No, she said quietly. I think you're not seeing the bigger picture. And that's when Mercer made the second mistake. He tightened his grip again. All right, he snapped. That's it. He reached for his radio, but before he could press the button, another voice cut through the flashing lights. Mercer. It came from behind him, sharp, authoritative. Sergeant Hollis stepped out of the nearest patrol car. 15 years on the department, the kind of presence that could quiet a room just by walking into it. He had been reviewing the accident report when the raised voices caught his attention. Now, he was watching the scene carefully. Mercer turned. She's interfering with the scene, he said quickly. Hollis looked at the woman, then at Mercer's hand gripping her jacket, then back at Mercer. Let go, Hollis said. Mercer hesitated. But I said let go. Mercer released the jacket. The fabric settled back into place. The woman brushed it once with her hand. Calmly. No anger. No rush. Hollis stepped forward slightly. Ma'am, he said, are you involved in the accident? No. Do you need assistance? No. Then why are you inside the active perimeter? She looked at him for a moment, then spoke the same quiet sentence again. Because something here needs to be observed. Mercer rolled his eyes. Hollis ignored him. What exactly needs to be observed? The sergeant asked. The woman glanced briefly toward the patrol car cameras, then toward the small group filming from the sidewalk, then back to Hollis. Procedure, she said. Hollis studied her face carefully now. There was a pause, a longer one, because suddenly, something about this situation didn't feel routine anymore. And that was the moment the police radio crackled. Dispatch. Urgent tone. Hollis, confirm location. The sergeant reached for his shoulder mic. Dispatch, go ahead. There was a brief pause on the line. Then the dispatcher spoke again. But the words that followed would change the entire atmosphere of the street. And Mercer would realize, far too late, that the woman in the red jacket had never been the one out of place. She had been exactly where she intended to be. The police radio crackled again, not the casual static of routine dispatch traffic. This one carried weight, the kind of pause that makes officers stop what they're doing before the message even finishes. Sergeant Hollis pressed the radio button closer to his shoulder. Dispatch, go ahead. The woman in the red jacket said nothing. Mercer crossed his arms now, irritated that the moment had shifted away from him. The crowd was still watching, phones still recording. He expected dispatch to say something ordinary. Another accident, traffic diversion, routine instructions. Instead, the dispatcher spoke slowly. Hollis, confirm you have a female civilian on scene. Red jacket. Hollis blinked once. His eyes moved back toward the woman. Yes, he said cautiously. There was another pause on the line. Then the dispatcher spoke again. But this time the voice carried something unusual. Respect. Stand by. Mercer scoffed under his breath. Stand by for what? He muttered. The woman said nothing. She simply watched. Hollis didn't reply. His instincts were beginning to itch now, because dispatch almost never asked officers to confirm civilians by clothing. That wasn't standard procedure. Not unless... He pushed the thought away. The radio crackled again. Sergeant Hollis, go ahead. You are instructed to disengage immediately. Mercer frowned. Disengage? He said. Hollis didn't answer him yet. Dispatch continued. Do not detain. Do not question. Maintain scene control only. Mercer stepped closer. What is that supposed to mean? Hollis still didn't respond. His attention was fixed on the radio. Then came the next line, and the entire situation shifted. Federal oversight has confirmed presence on scene. The words hung in the air, quiet, heavy. The crowd didn't understand them. Mercer didn't either. But Hollis did. His posture changed instantly. His voice lowered. Dispatch, confirm agency. A small pause, then the answer. Division clearance code, Orion. The name wasn't announced loudly, but it might as well have been thunder, because Hollis had heard that name before. Not in briefings, not in official department meetings, but in quiet conversations between command staff. The kind of conversations that happen when doors are closed and voices drop low. Orion, the Federal Oversight Division that appeared when departments were already under review. They didn't announce audits. They didn't schedule inspections. They simply appeared, quietly. And when they did, careers tended to end. Mercer laughed, a dismissive laugh. Federal oversight? He said. What are they overseeing? A fender bender? Hollis slowly lowered his radio. He looked at Mercer, then at the woman, then back at Mercer again. Step back, Hollis said quietly. Mercer blinked. What? I said step back. Mercer's irritation flared again. This is ridiculous. But the sergeant's voice didn't change. Step back! There was something different in Hollis's tone now. Not anger, not authority. Caution. Mercer took half a step away, still confused, still convinced this was a misunderstanding. Hollis turned back toward the woman. For the first time since arriving, he studied her carefully. The red jacket, the calm posture, the lack of reaction, the patience. And then he noticed something Mercer had completely ignored. The small black pin on the inside seam of her collar. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't jewelry. It was a simple metallic emblem, barely visible, but unmistakable once you knew what it meant. A circle. Inside it, 3 intersecting lines. Orion. Hollis felt the tension in his chest tighten. Because suddenly, every moment from the last 3 minutes looked very different. Mercer grabbing her jacket, Mercer shouting, Mercer escalating, and the cameras recording everything. The woman spoke again, still calm, still measured. You're beginning to see the situation more clearly. Hollis nodded once. Yes, ma'am? Mercer's head snapped toward him. Ma'am? The woman didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply watched Mercer now, the way a teacher might watch a student who had rushed through the wrong answer. Mercer pointed at her. Hold on. Nobody said she was... Hollis raised a hand. Mercer. Sergeant, this is ridiculous. Mercer. The officer stopped talking. Hollis turned fully toward him now and lowered his voice. Go stand by the patrol vehicle. Mercer stared at him. You can't be serious. I am. Mercer's jaw tightened. You're pulling me off a scene because some woman... Mercer. The name landed heavier this time, not loud, but final. The officer hesitated, then turned and walked back toward the patrol car, but his pride refused to leave quietly. So what? Mercer muttered loudly enough for the crowd to hear. She calls a friend in Washington, and we roll out the red carpet? The woman didn't react. Hollis didn't either, but several of the officers nearby exchanged glances. Because Mercer still didn't understand what had just happened, and that misunderstanding was about to become much worse. The woman turned slightly toward Hollis. Sergeant, she said calmly. Yes, ma'am. Has your department received notice regarding the municipal review? Hollis hesitated. Yes, 3 weeks ago. And the city council dismissed it. The woman nodded slowly. I expected that. Mercer, standing beside the patrol car, folded his arms. "This is unbelievable." But the woman continued speaking to Hollis as if Mercer wasn't there. "Your department contracts several external vendors." "Yes. Traffic systems, evidence processing, data storage." Hollis nodded again. "That's correct." The woman looked toward the flashing patrol lights, then toward the intersection cameras mounted above the street. "Have you ever reviewed who owns those contracts?" Hollis frowned slightly. "That's handled through the city procurement office." "Exactly." The word landed softly, but it carried weight. Mercer scoffed again. "This has nothing to do with a traffic accident." The woman turned toward him slowly. "No," she said. "It doesn't." Another officer approached Hollis quietly. "Sergeant, what's going on?" Hollis lowered his voice. "Federal oversight." The officer's eyebrows rose. "Here?" "Yes." The woman took a small step closer, still calm, still patient. "You see, Officer Mercer," she said, "you assumed tonight was about you controlling a situation." Mercer rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go." "But it never was." She gestured subtly toward the intersection. "The accident that brought you here." Mercer interrupted. "Yeah. 2 drivers arguing over a lane change." She shook her head slightly. "That's what dispatch told you." Hollis's expression changed. "Wait," the woman continued. "But that wasn't the real problem." Now even the officers nearby leaned closer. "What problem?" Mercer said. The woman glanced once more toward the city cameras mounted above the street, then back to Hollis. "This intersection is one of 37 currently under review." "For what?" Hollis asked. "For data routing." The phrase sounded harmless, but something in her tone made it clear it wasn't. Mercer laughed again. "Data routing?" "Yes." Hollis felt the tension in the air tighten, because suddenly he remembered something from the municipal notice, a name, one mentioned briefly in the report. A private contractor, a technology provider used by multiple cities. He spoke slowly. "Vector Dynamics." The woman nodded. "Yes." Mercer looked between them. "Okay, now you're both speaking another language." But Hollis didn't respond, because Vector Dynamics had been showing up in more and more government contracts lately. Traffic systems, security cameras, evidence storage software. And that name had been attached to something else. Something much bigger. Something that had triggered federal attention. The woman looked back toward Mercer one last time. "You thought this was a traffic stop?" Mercer shrugged. "Looks like one to me." She studied him quietly, then said something that made several officers nearby go still. "This intersection is currently transmitting law enforcement body camera footage to a private server outside the state." Silence. Even the crowd filming sensed something had shifted. Mercer frowned. "That's not possible." The woman tilted her head slightly. "Then why did your department's live footage feed redirect 6 minutes ago?" Hollis's hand moved slowly toward his radio again, because suddenly, this wasn't about a loud officer grabbing a civilian. This wasn't about a street argument. This was about something much larger, and the woman in the red jacket had just revealed the first crack in it. But what no one on that street understood yet was that this intersection, this accident, and Officer Mercer's very public confrontation, had already been recorded somewhere else, and someone much higher up was now watching. A silence spread across the intersection that hadn't existed before. Just minutes ago it had been noise, sirens, traffic, raised voices. Now the air felt heavier. Sergeant Hollis slowly lifted his radio again, but for the first time since arriving, he didn't press the button. Because the words the woman had just spoken didn't sound like speculation. They sounded like confirmation. This intersection is currently transmitting law enforcement body camera footage to a private server outside the state. Mercer shook his head immediately. "No chance." He pointed toward the patrol car. "Our cameras upload to the department cloud." The woman watched him the same way she had since the moment he grabbed her jacket. Patient, observing. You believe they do, she said calmly. Mercer scoffed. And you don't? I know they don't. The crowd murmured again, phones lifted higher. Some people had started whispering to each other. The tone of the situation had shifted from confrontation to curiosity. But Mercer refused to feel it. He was too deep into the moment now, too committed to being right. This is ridiculous, he said loudly. You're standing in the middle of a traffic investigation talking about servers. The woman turned slightly toward Hollis again. Sergeant, do you have a department tablet in your vehicle? Hollis nodded slowly. Yes. Please bring it. Mercer rolled his eyes. Oh, great. But Hollis was already walking toward the patrol car. Because the moment the name Vector Dynamics had entered the conversation, something in the back of his mind had started connecting dots. The municipal review, the federal notice, the quiet conversations among command staff, the sudden contract approvals the city council had pushed through months ago. Mercer leaned back against the patrol car door, arms crossed, smirking. You know what this feels like? No one answered. A performance. He gestured toward the phone's recording. Some kind of internet stunt. The woman didn't look at him. Officer Mercer. Yeah? You're about to learn why patience matters. He laughed again, but the confidence in that laugh was starting to thin, because Hollis had returned, tablet in hand. Ma'am, he said quietly. She stepped closer. Open the body cam feed dashboard. Hollis tapped the screen. Several officers nearby leaned closer to see. Mercer stayed where he was, still pretending not to care. The dashboard appeared, live units, active recordings, upload status. Everything looked normal. See, Mercer said, uploads are active. The woman nodded slightly. Yes. Then she pointed, open the routing tab. Hollis frowned. There's no routing tab. There is, she replied. It was added with the last system update. Hollis scrolled. His finger paused. Then his expression shifted. Because there it was, a small option buried in the settings panel, routing diagnostics. He tapped it. The screen changed. A list of connection points appeared, most labeled normally. Department server, state archive, evidence backup. But one entry at the bottom looked different. External mirror node. Mercer leaned forward slightly now. What's that? Hollis tapped the entry. The destination address appeared. A long server string, followed by a company name. Vector Dynamics. The officers standing nearby exchanged looks. Mercer's smirk faded just a little. That's probably just backup storage, he said quickly. The woman shook her head. No. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a small phone, tapped the screen once, then held it up beside the tablet. Two identical server addresses glowed side by side. This node belongs to a private data center in Nevada, she said calmly. It is not part of any federal law enforcement network. Hollis stared at the screen, his stomach tightened. Who authorized this? The woman looked up at the street cameras mounted above the intersection. That, she said quietly, is exactly what we are investigating. Mercer pushed himself off the patrol car. Hold on. He stepped closer. Even if that's true. He gestured toward the tablet. That doesn't explain why you're standing here. The woman finally turned fully toward him again, and this time, there was the faintest trace of something in her expression. Not anger, not triumph, just clarity. I'm here because your department's system triggered a federal alert 8 minutes ago. Mercer blinked. Alert? Yes. Hollis looked at her. What kind of alert? She answered simply, unauthorized surveillance replication. The officers nearby shifted uncomfortably, because that phrase carried legal weight. Serious weight. Mercer shook his head. This still doesn't make sense. The woman looked back toward the tablet. Sergeant, please scroll. Hollis did. More routing logs appeared, each one marked with timestamps, each one showing data transfers leaving the department network. But one timestamp stood out. 6 minutes ago. The moment Mercer had grabbed the woman's jacket, the moment phones began recording, the moment body cameras turned toward the confrontation, the moment footage started flowing outward. The woman spoke quietly. This incident triggered the system. Mercer's voice dropped. "You're saying..." "Yes," she said. "Your body cam footage is currently being copied to a private server." A heavy silence followed. Even the crowd seemed to feel it, because suddenly, the entire confrontation looked different. Not just a loud officer, not just a traffic scene. Something else had been watching, recording, collecting. Hollis looked up slowly. "Who owns Vector Dynamics?" The woman answered without hesitation. "A shell corporation." "Owned by?" "That is still being mapped." Mercer pointed at her again. "So you're telling me some random company hacked our system?" "No." Her voice stayed calm. "They were invited in." That sentence landed like a dropped weight. Hollis felt his pulse quicken. "By who?" The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the flashing patrol lights again, then toward the crowd, then toward the city skyline beyond the intersection, as if measuring how much of the truth this moment could hold. Finally, she spoke. "Multiple cities approved contracts with Vector Dynamics over the last 18 months. For traffic infrastructure, for evidence storage, for public safety upgrades." Hollis nodded slowly. "I remember the procurement reports. What those reports did not include," she paused, "was the mirror network." Mercer frowned. "The what?" "The system that quietly copies law enforcement footage into a private archive." Another officer spoke up. "Why would anyone want that?" The woman met his eyes. "For leverage." The word sent another ripple through the group, because suddenly, everyone understood what that meant. Every traffic stop, every arrest, every confrontation, every mistake, every moment of authority captured on camera, stored somewhere else. Outside official oversight? Mercer swallowed. "That would be illegal." "Yes," she said. "It would." Hollis looked down at the tablet again, then back at her. "And tonight?" "Tonight," she said. "We confirmed it." Mercer ran a hand across his head, trying to process, trying to keep control of the situation. But something else had already started happening. 2 black SUVs had just turned the corner at the far end of the street. No sirens, no police markings, just quiet headlights moving toward the intersection. The woman noticed them first. Of course she did. She glanced briefly toward Hollis. "They're early." Mercer turned. "Who?" The SUVs rolled slowly through the blocked lane, stopping beside the patrol cars. The doors opened. 3 people stepped out. Dark suits, calm expressions, no urgency. But every officer present felt the shift immediately. Federal presence. The first man approached Hollis, flashed a badge quickly, low enough that the crowd couldn't see it, high enough that Hollis could. "Evening, Sergeant." Hollis nodded. "Agent." The man's eyes moved briefly toward Mercer, then toward the woman in the red jacket. He gave a small nod. "Ma'am." Mercer stared at them. "What is going on?" The agent turned toward him slowly, his tone polite but firm. "Officer Mercer. Officer Mercer." He gestured lightly toward the patrol cars. "I'm going to ask you to remain by your vehicle." Mercer's voice sharpened. "Am I in trouble?" The agent held his gaze. "That depends." "On what?" The agent's eyes flicked briefly toward the cameras mounted above the intersection, then back to Mercer. "On how much your department already knows." The air around the street tightened again, because the truth was beginning to surface, and it was bigger than a traffic stop, bigger than one officer, bigger even than one city. But the most dangerous part of the entire situation still hadn't been revealed yet, because somewhere far away, inside a quiet server facility in Nevada, someone had just received a notification, a federal access request. And that meant Whoever had been collecting the footage now knew they had been discovered. The federal agent's words lingered in the flashing red and blue light. "On how much your department already knows." Officer Mercer stared at him, the confidence that had carried him through the entire confrontation now draining slowly from his face. Around them, the intersection had become strangely quiet, not silent. The city still breathed. Cars still rolled slowly past the barricades, but the energy had shifted. People sensed that something much bigger than a traffic incident was unfolding. The three agents who stepped out of the SUVs moved with quiet efficiency. Not rushed, not aggressive, just precise. One of them approached the patrol vehicle and briefly glanced at the mounted body camera system. Another walked toward the intersection cameras mounted high above the street. The third remained beside the woman in the red jacket. She still hadn't moved much, still calm, still watching everything. Mercer shook his head slowly. "This is insane," he muttered. "No," the agent replied. "This is overdue." Sergeant Hollis exhaled slowly. "Agent, what exactly are we dealing with here?" The agent glanced briefly toward the city cameras, then toward the patrol vehicles, then back at Hollis. "Your department's video infrastructure has been part of a mirror network operating in 9 cities. Hollis felt the number land hard. 9? For now. Mercer laughed nervously. "You're telling me someone's been stealing police videos?" The woman in the red jacket finally spoke again. "Not stealing. Collecting," Mercer frowned. "For what?" The agent answered before she could. "Insurance." That single word made several officers look at each other, because everyone understood what it implied. Not insurance in the normal sense. Leverage, control. Mercer shook his head again. "That's ridiculous." The agent turned toward him. "Officer Mercer, how long have you been wearing that body camera?" 8 years. "And during that time, how many confrontations have you recorded?" Mercer shrugged. "Hundreds." The agent nodded once. "Now imagine every one of those moments stored somewhere outside your department." Mercer's jaw tightened. "That would be illegal." "Yes," the agent said, "it would." Another agent approached from the patrol car. "Sir." The man holding the tablet looked up. "We confirmed the routing." Hollis felt his stomach drop slightly. "How long has it been active?" The agent checked the screen again. 14 months. The number hit like a punch. 14 months, over a year of footage, traffic stops, arrests, arguments, mistakes, everything. The woman in the red jacket looked up toward the intersection cameras again. "Actually," she said quietly, "it's longer." The agents turned toward her. "How much longer?" one asked. She met his eyes calmly. 18 months. Mercer stared at her. "How would you know that?" She answered simply, "Because we've been tracking the network." The crowd across the street had grown larger now. Word had begun to spread. People whispered, pointed, filmed, but the agents didn't acknowledge them. Their focus stayed inside the perimeter. One of them walked toward the black SUVs and opened the rear door. Inside sat a hardened equipment case. He carried it back and placed it on the hood of the patrol car, unlocked it. Inside were several compact devices, signal analyzers, network intercept tools, hardware designed to follow digital trails. He began connecting one to the tablet. Mercer watched the process with increasing unease. "This still doesn't explain something," he said. The woman looked at him. "What? Why here?" The question hung in the air. It was a fair question. Why this intersection? Why tonight? Why this confrontation? The woman folded her sunglasses slowly and slipped them into her jacket pocket. Then she answered. "Because this location triggered a live replication alert." Hollis looked at her again. "The moment Mercer grabbed you." "Yes," Mercer scoffed. "So this is all because of that?" "No." Her voice stayed calm. That moment simply exposed it. The agent working on the equipment looked up. "Sir? What is it?" We're receiving a response from the Nevada server. The air tightened again. Response? Hollis asked. Yes. What kind? The agent hesitated, then answered. They're shutting it down. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. That's faster than expected. Mercer looked between them. Shutting what down? The agent pointed at the tablet. The mirror node. Hollis stepped closer. How long until it disconnects? Less than a minute. Another agent immediately grabbed a second device and plugged it into the system. Trying to capture the final routing logs, he said. The woman watched the screen carefully. Don't lose the endpoint address. I won't. But something else was happening. Something subtle on the tablet screen. New lines of data began appearing rapidly, faster than before. The agent frowned. That's strange. What? Hollis asked. They're dumping files. Mercer blinked. Dumping? Yes. The agent scrolled. Lines of timestamps poured across the display. Hundreds, thousands, video files, metadata logs, location tags, all being pushed out at once. The woman's expression hardened slightly. They're cleaning the archive. Another agent leaned over the tablet. Looks like they're wiping the system. No, she said. They're transferring it. To where? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the city skyline again, then back at the screen. Because there was something in the data she recognized, a pattern, a routing structure she had seen before, in another city during another investigation, and that realization made her voice lower. This isn't the first time they've done this. Hollis looked at her sharply. You've seen this before? Yes. Where? Denver. The agents exchanged glances. Because Denver had been the first city where the Federal Oversight Division suspected something unusual inside municipal infrastructure contracts. But that investigation had stalled. Files had disappeared. Witnesses stopped cooperating. The network vanished before they could trace it. Until now. The tablet screen continued flooding with information. Mercer watched the lines scroll faster and faster. What happens if they finish transferring everything? The agent answered bluntly. We lose the trail. Hollis looked at the woman. What do we do? She watched the data for another moment, then pointed at one specific server address appearing repeatedly in the logs. There, the agent froze. That's the destination node. Lock it, he typed quickly. The system attempted to trace the outgoing route. For a moment, it worked. A geographic location began to resolve on the screen. State, city, facility identifier. Then suddenly, the connection dropped. The transfer stopped. The mirror node went dark. The agent leaned back slowly. They cut it, Mercer exhaled. So that's it? The woman shook her head. No. She pointed at the screen again. Scroll back. The agent did. One line remained visible, the final routing request, just before the shutdown. A location tag. Hollis read it slowly. Harbor Ridge Data Center? The woman nodded. Exactly. Mercer crossed his arms again. And that means what? She met his eyes calmly. It means the archive still exists. Where? She looked toward the agents, then toward Hollis, then back at Mercer. In another city. The agent beside the SUV closed the equipment case. So this one was just a relay? Yes. Mercer shook his head. You're telling me this whole thing was just a copy machine? The woman's voice stayed steady. A copy machine for leverage. The agents began packing up the devices. The intersection lights continued flashing across the buildings. But the confrontation had changed completely. The loud moment, the shouting, the grabbed jacket, those had been the smallest part of the story. Hollis looked at the woman one more time. Where does the trail go now? She glanced down the street, then toward the federal vehicles, then finally answered. To the people who built the network. Mercer frowned. And who would do that? The woman slid her sunglasses back on, her voice calm, measured. The same corporation that's been quietly inserting itself into city infrastructure across the country. Hollis already knew the name, but he said it anyway. Vector Dynamics, she nodded. Yes, but what none of the officers at that intersection realized yet was that Vector Dynamics was only the front, a corporate mask. Behind it sat a much larger network, one that had been quietly collecting leverage across multiple cities. And tonight, because one officer grabbed the wrong person's jacket, that network had just realized something dangerous. Someone was finally following the trail.